For years, the statistics have remained the same. 1 in 4 people are afflicted by mental health illness at some point in their lives, with women being twice as likely as men to be diagnosed. A mission of mine has been to dismantle the stigma around mental health illness. But now, more than ever, I believe that it will take all of us working together to dismantle this stigma, to make this a conversation all of us can have over a meal. Hello, I'm Prakriti Poddar, Global Head of Mental Health and Wellbeing for RoundGlass. Sunday, October 10th is World Mental Health Day, and we encourage everyone to make mental health a priority.
Our mental health affects how we feel, think, and act. It is our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. And it is important at every stage of life. It's estimated that 970 million people are suffering with mental illness worldwide. Among all these cases, 284 million people are suffering with anxiety. Are you putting your mental health first? Today we want to raise mental health awareness to support World Mental Health Day this October 10th. We want to make mental health care a reality for all.
I want to introduce a dear friend of mine who I met when he was very young in India. He's a psychiatrist, a neuroscientist, a mental health advocate, and a social entrepreneur. Dr. Raghu Abasani. He's the founder and the CEO of Minds Foundation, and he joins us today from Los Angeles, where he's working in private practice at the University of Southern California. This year, 2021, has been the year of it's okay not to be okay. We saw Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka put their mental health at this year's Olympics and French Open. Biles, a 4-time Olympic gold medalist, said she was not in the right state of mind to continue the competition. Quote was, "We have to protect our mind and our body, rather than just going out and doing what the world wants us to do." Osaka, the Japanese tennis player, who is now ranked 12th, withdrew from this year's French Open and missed the Wimbledon to focus on her mental health. Raghu, as you know, mental health is one of the most stigmatized notions across cultures. And despite that, we're finally able to see a glimmer of hope with international influencers opening up about their mental health vulnerabilities. Have you seen any trends of mental health awareness and acceptance in your work?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel as we near World Mental Health Day. And as always, it's incredible to see you. And I will correct you and say that I still think I'm young. I know we met when I was younger, but I'm still young. Um, it's a great question and topic to bring up. On the one hand, it's amazing that people of influence are speaking up about their own mental health. They're creating a space where it's okay to start to speak up, and it validates that it's okay to feel, sad or lonely or depressed or anxious or angry and have a wide range of emotions. And at the end of the day, actually having a wide range of emotions is what brings perfection to being a human. So it's amazing on that front. On the other hand, what I have seen happen is that social media has sort of infiltrated the mental health space. And to speak of mental health and to use hashtags around hashtag suicide awareness or hashtag bipolar or borderline is almost become kind of a sexy topic, and it's glamorized in some way. And so I do worry sometimes about the extent of people that might not have the credibility that are using it in terms of trying to gain followers or trying to kind of improve their own brand. So what I would like to see moving forward is a collaboration of both of those platforms where we're able to use folks that have a large audience and influence, but bring to the forefront the stories of those with lived experience. You know, whether it's Simone Biles, or whether it's your neighbor, or whether it's a 10-year-old child in an elementary school in a small town. So if we can pair the lived experience of very diverse stories, not just celebrities, but everyone, with people of influence, with a large audience, and actually create that platform, that's where it's going to be really awesome and where beautiful change can happen.
I agree with you. In fact, I think that's what the foundation, Your Mind's foundation does. It brings the real conversations from the real people who are going through, the grassroots people that are really working on this. I want to encourage anybody who's watching this to please use our chat feature to share your questions and your thoughts. And we will include that in the conversation today, because your voice, your understanding, your education in this department is as important as anybody else's. And that's the only we can use to start collaborating on conversations and breaking the stigma. Raghu, to your point, talking about these influencers, I know that TikTok is being used now as a medium to talk about mental health. I definitely want your take on it. Of course, I have mine, but this is not about what I think. I really want to hear from all of you. At some point, what is this whole TikTok a mental health journey, and what do you think about it?
Sure. So I don't have TikTok on my phone, but I definitely have seen a lot of TikTok. And what's interesting is that, traditionally I thought, okay, kids are using it, millennials, Gen Zs are using TikTok. But actually, a lot of my patients who are older and quote unquote geriatric are addicted to TikTok. And it's a very interesting phenomenon. And what's great about it is there are psychologists and mental health professionals and even some influencers putting out really good content about little tips and tricks people can do to regulate anxiety and emotions. And it helps bring the conversation to light. And that's been really amazing. However, you might have seen that there's been some research that has come out showing, quote, TikTok, as in ticks, developing from folks watching videos that demonstrate a lot of these symptoms of tics as we talk about them, and particularly adolescent females developing these disorders. And there has been a clear rise in actual tic disorder during specifically the pandemic when these videos and content were coming out. So there is sort of a contagion as well that can happen. So the platform is amazing in the sense that it really allows for, again, a wide range of the audience to access mental health services and resources, or even little CBT tricks, right? But I think that these corporations also have a responsibility to make sure that they're putting out the right content, and there's some system in place to verify and validate the content.
It's true. I think if we have open access to conversations, we also have to have a responsibility. All of us have to have a responsibility to what we're putting out. And I do believe, from my own position, that it's very important to go where they are, where the youth are, and that's why there's so many people that are going to come on here and talk about what they've been doing with the youth as well. Getting to where they are to be a spokespeople that could help them navigate that journey, I think is really important. But there has to be a hygiene check on everything that's going on. I didn't realize actually that people were, copying tics. I didn't realize that. That's new insight to me, and I
Well,
think
it's
that it's
unconscious
important as.
behavior as well.
So if this year you had one focus, Raghu, what would that be for mental health?
What a question. If there was one focus, it would be to really just encourage everybody to make at least one intentional conversation per day with someone, not a text, but actually calling or actually having a meaningful conversation face to face, because we've been separated for so long physically at this point that we're really seeking that. And we're humans and we're organisms that require community and relationship. And so I would encourage, my vision is just everyone making that one goal of having one real meaningful conversation a day with someone else.
That's beautiful. And I want to introduce now these two amazing women who have a shared passion for mental health and reform. and been working so hard on it. Andrea Sonnenberg, a mother, lawyer, mental health advocate, she lost her 21-year-old son, Bradley. He battled with anxiety, depression, and an eating disorder since childhood. Tamu Lewis says her late brother, Lee Thompson, lost his battle with bipolar disorder 8 years ago when he was found dead by suicide in his Los Angeles apartment. He secretly dealt with his mental illness while working as an actor on Disney's TV show The Famous and TNT's Rizzoli and Isles. Welcome, Andrea and Tamu. Thank you for joining us to make mental health a priority. Andrea, what can you hope we will accomplish here today?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to be here. And the fact that you're doing this is really what I'm, part of what my mission is, to talk about these issues, to spread the word to people, to enable people to feel more comfortable with speaking about mental illness, speaking about their challenges, gaining resources, learning what works for some people and methodologies and modalities that they may be able to try. So that's really what I'm looking for and really what I'm hoping we can accomplish today. And I feel like, you're doing it. You've got this incredible platform where you can reach lots of people and you can have experts and advocates and all sorts of people sharing their stories, because if we can share our individual stories, we find out that we're not alone. We find out that other people are similarly suffering, and we can share ideas and ways to cope with the difficulties that we face in today's world. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Tamu, what personal message do you want to share with our viewers? And if you could explain why that's so important to you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me and including me in this important conversation. I would say that I'd like to share from a caregiver's perspective, from a loved one's perspective, to offer support if there's someone in your life who is experiencing mental health challenges and you're not quite sure what to do or how best to support them. I want to encourage those caregivers and loved ones to reach out for support and figure out what works for you in that particular circumstance, and also to ask the individual, what does support look like for them? Because sometimes we have very good intentions to show support and love and try to understand, but the way that we are showing love may not be received as love from that person who's going through a mental health challenge. So I think trying to keep those lines of communication open and asking them what support looks like for them kind of gives us a head start as a caregiver or a loved one to work through some of the challenging mental health situations that can occur.
Thank you so much. I think it's really important. I want to ask Raghu a quick question about this. We do so much work with people who have mental health illnesses. We manage to help them once they reach out. But how much work is really being done with caregivers? I think that's a really important question. And how are you doing this? So when somebody brings their loved one to you?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And unfortunately, sometimes, and some of you might have experienced this, when somebody comes to get help, especially in an emergency situation, there's this like rip apart between the people who brought them in and the actual person needing care. And I always find that to be a bit odd, Why are you separating the support system in a moment of crisis? And usually it's for safety concerns, but still, I mean, have somebody there. And I'll refer to, as controversial as this might be, Kanye West did an amazing interview with David Letterman a few months ago or a year ago, and he brought this exact point up of being in a psychiatric emergency room and being separated from the person who had brought him in. And why can't we have that support system or caregiver there? But to get to your question, first we have to I want to redefine what caregiver is. And it's not just necessarily a loved one or a family member, but it could also be a friend or a neighbor or anyone for that matter who cares genuinely about this person in crisis. And not everyone has family involved. So let's just, I think, first be clear on that it's a broad definition. And secondly, that means we do need to support them because their own mental health is going to suffer as they're trying to help and care for somebody else. And oftentimes in traditional mental health and psychiatric care, there's not much room for that other than maybe some family meetings with caregivers, or they speak about a plan at the time of discharge from a facility. But we need to start to create a network for caregivers to go and discuss the types of unique things that they're personally dealing with, whether it's dealing with the mental health system or having frustrations with providers and communication with providers. So it is so critical. And I really encourage governments, institutions, clinics, and hospitals at the very least to start to invest in that, because that's a core component. Research has shown endlessly the importance of support system in caregiver involvement in healing and mental health.
You know,
Thank you
if
so
I
much
could
for
just
that.
add, can I just add something to that? Sometimes it's so hard for the individual to seek out mental health help. And so a lot of times the caregiver or the loved one or the friend or whoever the support system is the one that gets them to take that necessary step. So what Raghu is saying is so important, that we have to be able to include them in the process, because they're the ones oftentimes that gets the person to go seek that help that they need.
Yeah, 100%. And I know that, Andrea, for you, you mentioned that the system failed your son many times. I'd really like to understand what you mean by that. What happened? What was the failure? What was it only to get to do with this aspect? And how does the system become stronger for you through your experience? And really sharing that with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, sure. My son struggled from a very early age, and he had an eating disorder at a very young age, and he had to go to a mental health institution, an eating disorder clinic that served mostly older patients. So it was very difficult to be an 11-year-old and an inpatient at an eating disorder clinic when everybody else was in their teens and older. So there wasn't really the support system there to serve, again, back to what we were just talking about, the caregivers. And we're really the caregivers because he was a minor, to serve the caregivers as well. And we weren't able to visit in his bedroom. We could only visit in a waiting room. He was still, a really young child. And then when he finally left the inpatient clinic and went to the outpatient clinic, it was hard to get him, because he was so young, to stay focused and participate. And they eventually just dismissed him. They just said, you know what, that's it. He can just leave. And they weren't even done with his treatment. So to me, that felt like a failure, a failure in the system. They weren't willing to work with him and finalize his treatment and come up with a proper outpatient program for him. That was really, that was the first failure. We then went on to, he went back to school and had so many difficulties, was not able to regulate his behavior, was not able to follow the rules, was not able to succeed in school. And we realized that there wasn't a school for him. And we ended up having to send him to a therapeutic boarding school out of state. Again, an 11-year-old who had to leave his home and not live in the comfort and security of his family home, because there was no place for him. There was no school for him. And I feel like there needs to be schools and centers and treatment options for young people, really young people, because he was so young, to be able to help him in his home environment, which the experts all acknowledge is the best place for the young person to be able to be. That's the first choice, is to be able to have them in their own home to be while they're receiving treatment. And then the third time that the system failed him, or failed our whole family, was he lived in a sober living home after he ended up dropping out of college because of his mental health issues were too severe. And there's no regulation at the sober living home, and he wasn't an addict in the traditional sense. He wasn't addicted to alcohol or recreational drugs, but he was in essence addicted to psychiatric medications and was on a search for the perfect medication to self-soothe. And the sober living homes do not regulate. They're not licensed. They don't even have to report if there's a death at their facility. And he just was given his medications and would take them on his own. They didn't check what he was taking and how much he was taking. And one night he claimed that he didn't feel well, and they gave him an Advil, and he grabbed a Red Bull on the way up to his room, and no one checked on him, and he died in his sleep that night. So, the ultimate failure, the ultimate system failure.
Yeah.
And that is what has led me on this path to want to share his story in the hopes of helping other people. So and if I can help one person, then I have accomplished my mission.
Thank you so much for that. It's a huge amount of struggle. I know that in India we have a center as well, and it's a controversial topic, but psychiatric drugs really do have to be measured. And I would love Raghu for you to talk a little bit about that and how we can combat that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your son's story. And, he sounds like such an amazing individual and a life to be celebrated moving forward as well. So I'm sure he's very proud of you making the impact that you're making.
Thank you.
Psychiatric medication it's an interesting topic, and there's a lot of stigma around it historically, whether depicted in media or whatnot. It is beneficial for a number of people. However, we need to start to look at alternative treatment, and we need to start to integrate alternative treatment as well. There does need to be more regulation around psychiatric medication. Particularly, we do have it a bit in the United States around controlled substances, but even that is only state by state. There's no federal monitoring system, which to me is a little bit ridiculous at this point. I mean, it's 2021 and we're not monitoring across the nation. So there needs to be regulation around that. I do think that providers now, especially in psychiatry, my generation, there's a lot more intention around prescribing habits and patterns than might have been in the past with, more veteran providers. But I do want to emphasize again that we have to start to look at alternative means of treatment, whether it's with amino acids, nutritional psychiatry, adaptogenic supplementation, things like that, to take a more preventative approach versus a reactive approach of just using traditional psychopharmacology.
Thank you so much. Tamu, I would really like to shift it to you. And your brother really hid a lot of his struggles due to the stigma. What do you believe prevented him from sharing his diagnosis?
Yes, thank you. I would say that it was the stigma, right? Because this was 8 years ago. So maybe in today's time, it would be different, since we're kind of talking about it a lot more openly in the media, and it's coming from, celebrities sharing their experiences, as you mentioned. But in 2013, he felt like the stigma associated with mental illness might have a negative impact on his career in Hollywood. So he chose to keep it to himself. I do want to point out that he was working with a psychiatrist, and he was on medication and taking it properly. However, I do believe there was a change in medication that was close to his passing, and that may or may not have had an impact. And then also I would mention that when I spoke with his castmates on the set of the show, he was filming his 4th season of the show Rizzoli and Isles on TNT. They mentioned that he just seemed a little bit, just a little bit tired, and they asked him how he was doing, and he said he was tired. And what I feel like is, if they had the context of his diagnosis, they may not have accepted that response from him. They may have responded differently and been able to offer some additional support to him, but because of the stigma and because of him keeping it to himself, then his community of friends and co-workers in LA didn't know. They didn't have the benefit of knowing that information and how to support him.
Thank you. And I know that you've taken it upon yourself to make sure that that never happens again, even in your own family. And with your oldest daughter, who's also suffering from bipolar disorder, there is no secret about it. You're making sure that there's conversations around it. I'd love you to share your experience and how you've worked through this when it comes to helping her.
Yes. So of course, my passion around promoting mental health education is a result of me losing my brother to suicide, and then to have my oldest daughter began to have mental health challenges and then end up with the same diagnosis. I feel like my experience with my brother and the training and programs and things that I have benefited from as a result of my foundation, which is named after my brother, prepared me to better support my daughter. I will say that even though I'm educated and we're able to benefit from resources in the area that we live in, and we have providers that help us, I still felt alone in my parenting journey of trying to support my child, because as parents, and Andrea can relate to this, as parents, we want to make things better for our children. We want to fix anything we can fix, figure out if there's a solution. Even if we're told that there's not, it's like, it's got to be something, I can do to help my child. And when I realized that it was such a journey that, of course, we're still on, and that something that I came up with her doctor that worked 2 weeks ago and helped the situation, a month from now, that may no longer work, and we have to just keep adjusting and adapting. It can be very frustrating and overwhelming for a parent or a caregiver, as we talked about earlier. So I think it's just very important to be flexible and to manage your own expectations. And then as a parent, I had to seek support for myself. As the caregiver, I had to go to therapy, and that's really what helped me manage and better support my daughter, was to get additional support for myself.
That's a really, important point. And I know I want to go back to Andrea about this point as well. Your family was also going through everything that you were going through in terms of the support system that was around. I mean, your children were also part of this journey. And I know I heard some of your work before, and you mentioned that it became a tagline in your house where you said it's difficult to be Brad. And I think that that's really important, because that kind of conversation where you're opening up really and communicating 100% accurately with your family members is difficult, probably requires you to be supported in a way that actually taught you how to do that. I'd love to know how that played out for you, and even given what Tamu was saying, the importance of being supported by professionals for yourself.
Right. Well, that brings up sort of a lot of things that I could discuss. First off, it is really important to take care of yourself. And you go back, it's the famous saying, you got to put the mask on yourself before you can put the mask on your child, the oxygen mask. So yes, you absolutely have to take care of yourself, because you have to be able to be there to take care of the child who's struggling. In our household, we have 3 children, one who was Bradley's twin. So you could imagine it was difficult, because she didn't have the maturity or the empathy to understand what he was going through. So it, oftentimes she was ashamed, or she was embarrassed, or so we had to deal with those issues. The other thing we had to deal with as well was a lot of times when there's a child with a chronic illness, whether it's a mental illness or a physical illness, all the attention ends up on that child. And then you have, the unaffected sibling syndrome. Actually, they talked about that. They talk about that syndrome where the other children are left out and feel like they're not getting the attention that they deserve. So there was a lot of things to balance when you're raising a child with mental illness. We were able to make an effort to share everybody in the conversation. And like you said, we had a saying when he was little that it's hard to be Brad. And it just was. He was exceptionally sensitive, and he was, could be irritable, and transitions were difficult for him. But then on the other hand, he was so deep and sensitive and beautiful, and saw things in the world that other people didn't see. So like I mentioned earlier, when he ended up having to go to a therapeutic boarding school, it was really difficult for us. But in a way, it was, it was helpful for the remainder of our family to be able to have sort of somewhat of a more normal childhood for the two siblings that remained at home. And Bradley was able to get the care that he needed, and he was able to be in an environment where mental illness wasn't stigmatized, and where he could excel, and he could feel really good about himself, and he could feel accepted, and he could mature in a safe space, while my other two siblings were able to remain in their environment and excel and not have everything focused on the one child that was struggling.
I have to say that you're actually a very smart parent, and I hope that people, can hear you, because, I mean, we all have children, and we all make mistakes, and you were, really aware to be able to put these practices into place. And I think that that's really important, and thank you for that. And there's a person in the chat who's mentioned, who has I'll read her quote. "My mental health has been a big priority for me. Thankful for this today. The world needs it." Delilah says, "What's the difference between depression and just having a bad day?" Raghu, I think I'll let you take that.
Sure. Like I said before, part of being human is actually experiencing that full range of emotions, and that's a healthy thing. We want to be able to have a bad day if there's a reason to have a bad day, right? I am not going to quote the DSM criteria because I don't know. It's a guideline. It doesn't encompass the full human experience, though. I'm not really in agreement with it. I think that when depression becomes clinical is when it starts to truly interfere with your functioning. And what I mean by that is you start to have difficulty with relationships in your life, with relationships, at work. You have trouble at work, you have trouble accomplishing tasks that you normally would like to. You start to lose that desire and that love and that joy towards things that you truly really enjoyed doing before. And when that becomes consistent for a period of time is when someone should really seek help, right? And I think that's the broadest way to define just having a bad day or something bad that happened, right? Versus it's really extending for a long time and becoming detrimental, and you're no longer able to sleep. And then obviously the most critical is if you start to have thoughts that the world might be better without you, or that people don't see value in you, or you don't see value in yourself. And those are the things that are really critical for me when I assess whether it's clinical depression or not. We can go through the criteria, but it's really about, is this interfering with your life in any way, shape, or form? And do others recognize it in you as well? And are you starting to lose hope? And hope is one of the key factors when it comes to depression and to survival.
Yeah, it's true. I think the stigma around mental health has really caused various communities to accept mental health in different ways. I mean, I was talking with somebody today who said, who said to me that India apparently is one of the most mental health challenged countries, and yet that isn't true, even though we both are from there, Raghu. It isn't so true because we have a spiritual support system that is very vibrant and actually does support us in some way. And Nicole from the chat has just mentioned, Tamu, for you, that there's often stigma around mental health in the African American community. And how do you recommend someone within those communities share their struggles with loved ones?
Yes, that is a very good question, and that is certainly the case. I would agree with that. I would say, in terms of sharing the experience with your community and your loved ones, your immediate family, I would just try to be honest and open, but also provide some mental health education. So a lot of the issue can be around the stigma or just thinking that you can control your thoughts, you can just change it, you can just do better kind of thing in the African American community. So if you could use some of the resources from a lot of the national organizations online just to provide some mental health education, and then also you could even reach out to have someone facilitate the discussion that you're trying to have with your family. I know that faith can be a big issue in our community, and people might suggest that you just pray about it and your symptoms should go away. So there's just a lot of things that you may have to address. And I think that mental health education piece would be helpful to your loved ones and help you communicate what you're going through and what your concerns are around your mental health challenges.
I just want to add one thing to that as well. I have a very dear friend that I'm inspired by, Dr. Alfie, and she runs an organization called the Acoma Project, and she's been working in African American and Black communities for decades at this point, I believe, doing amazing work. And so, that's always a resource for folks to reach out to as well. And also the foundation that you've created, Tamu, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. And we do some partnerships with Dr. Alfie's programs as well. And we would certainly be happy to support in any way that we can.
I would love to hear a little bit more about your foundation as well, Tamu.
Yes. So I, along with my mom, we founded the organization together in 2014 after losing my brother in 2013. So it's named after him, the Lee Thompson Young Foundation. And we're really focused on promoting mental health education in schools, communities, and organizations. So prior to the pandemic, we would have mental health professionals who would go into our local school communities and work with small groups of students on a weekly basis so they could form that trusted relationship with the trusted adult and be able to learn coping skills and just address any type of issues that they had going on. So we did have some cases where it prevented suicide, in that the students were able to share their suicide ideations, anxiety and depression and things that they were going through. So then, of course, due to the pandemic, we're no longer able to go into the classrooms, but we've been able to provide support virtually and work with those who are in the classroom. So just providing some classroom intervention, training some skills for like social workers at the schools and the teachers. And now we have some programming for parents, because I'm so passionate about parents and caregivers. So we're starting circle groups for parents to be able to get that ongoing support and share resources and uplift one another who are on this journey. And then another thing I do is I go live every Tuesday just to share tips with parents on nurturing their child's mental health.
Yeah, I've been watching your Tuesday tips. I love them, especially because I have the three kids and they're also different, and I'm constantly aware that I need to be on the watch because I automatically assume everybody needs help. I mean, at some point in their life, so I'm always, and my son's always like nudging me and saying, "Please stop it, please stop it," and I'm like, "No, no, I'm aware that I need to just be cognizant of the fact that life may throw out a challenge, and I want to be there. I want to be present." And he's like, I think he gets really offended. But I have to say that it really did help all these conversations. And I love the fact that we're talking about this because even as my kid was in grade 4, he did highlight somebody else's struggle in mental health. He was able to see a red flag. And I think that's why those conversations are so important. And all of you here are really, walking the walk of making mental health a priority. And I feel so honored to be with all of you. You've taken the pain and made it into something that could propel others from falling prey to things that there could be support for. So that's really exciting. I'm excited to have you here. Raghu, how in the Minds Foundation, how are you working on really training people to make a mental health a priority, especially with the youth? And how do you measure the success? And I want to say that in that way because with mental health foundations, a lot of times people don't understand how to measure success of the foundations, and I find that is the critical pain areas in countries like India as well, where everything needs to be measurable, and these things are not so easily measurable since it is invisible, and what we're dealing with isn't as practical as what people want to measure.
Yeah, measurement is very challenging, and this is one of the reasons why traditionally, a lot of the funding from bigger foundations would go to things you could measure immediately. Here's $100,000, we're going to vaccinate 1 million people. Direct quantitative measurement. And that's a flaw of the development space because for me, mental health or poor mental health or ill health is an etiology of so many of the other traditional UN initiatives, right? It's the etiology of economic development failures, of community development, and of poverty, and also of other physical health ailments like diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So we do need to measure it. It's important because you want to make sure that the funding is using appropriately. So what we do at Minds Foundation is it's an organization that was based in the premise that education is power, and it's the thing that can help generations thrive. And I've seen it in my own family. My parents both coming from very impoverished villages in India, and now I'm sitting here with an MD in Los Angeles working as a psychiatrist. So there was a huge jump. And with that notion, I started Minds with the fact that it's not about just providing resources to people, but it's about providing the education to people to increase mental health literacy so they feel empowered in the decision they make to choose in getting help. And that's what we do. We started working door to door in rural villages in Gujarat, India, in Northwest India, literally door to door, knocking, providing conversations about mental health, doing workshops in these communities. And we've scaled from there. We've trained leaders in the communities, some that aren't even literate, but particularly we train women in these communities who have so much power, as we know at the end of the day, that women run the world. So we educate them on mental health and how to detect these red flags that your son's able to detect. And through that, they build trust and you start to see a shift in the community. We've grown from there. Now we work in schools, or we've been working in schools for the past number of years, providing direct education for students of all years, all ages, because mental health education should start on day one, not, you know, when they graduate or during exam period only, but on day one, providing them a toolkit for resilience. So when a stressor comes, they have it in their back pocket. And we also educate teachers because they're the gatekeepers at the end of the day. And so it's about taking a multi-pronged approach to providing education as well and making sure everyone receives it and it's curated for their needs. When it comes to measurement, we use validated tools like mental health literacy surveys, and those can show you quantitative and some qualitative data, right? Is there an increase in literacy by doing vignettes? Do people understand now due to our programs? that's all good and well. We do it because we should show some data. But at the end of the day, for me, the most powerful measure of impact is lived experience. And it's the stories that people can say, it's the moments they come up to our staff and tell us that what they've learned in a workshop or a program or a conversation they had with one of these females who's trained now as a mental health ambassador has changed their life or their viewpoint, or they're able to help a loved one, or when someone takes that education and then goes and helps a neighbor and brings them to us for help. That's true impact. We have the numbers, we have, the quantitative publications and research journals and everything, but I'll be honest with you, it's those stories that keep me going,
Mhm.
that keep our team going, and those are the ones that's impact. I mean, Andrea, you mentioned like you want to help one person. I'm sure you've helped thousands of people already through your work, but for me it's the same. It's if I can help one person with this organization, that's huge impact for me.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. I'm getting towards the end of this conversation with Chimu and Andrea. I would love to move to know how we can help your organization.
Oh, thank you so much for asking that. Of course, donations are always welcomed. We do use our donations to fund our programming. And through the pandemic, we have been sponsoring therapy sessions for people who want the help but don't have the financial resources to get help. So that is something that we've been really focused on during the pandemic, and we call it Meet Mental Health Needs. So certainly any donations are welcomed, as well as any collaborations to help continue to get the message out about mental health education, and to continue to be a support for everyone who's out there, the person that's dealing with the challenges, as well as the community around them. So thank you so much for asking that.
Thank you. And Andrea, I know we're going to see you in a bit, but any last comments?
Just to reiterate what was just said, how important education is. Part of what my mission is to educate and promote knowledge about how to deal with mental health. And we through the Bradley Sonnenberg Wellness Initiative at USC, we are now having a curriculum written, a mental health curriculum for college students. And the idea is to learn how to recognize it, to learn how to recognize it in others, to learn how to talk about it, to learn how to seek help. And so what was being said about that's sort of the way to solve the problem, is to make people aware. And I think we can start it at the college level, and the idea is to spread it to other colleges, but I think it needs to even start earlier than that. And so the hope is to take it further and spread it out to even to elementary schools. And I believe that the legislation now has a bill in front of Congress to allocate funding to be able to do some mental health education at the elementary school level and beyond. So education is in this area, as in all areas, but in particular now, amidst the crisis that we're in, it's really important. And I'm really grateful to see the work that's being done in the two foundations that we just heard about, and the work that we're trying to do as a way to empower and enable people to be able to help themselves and to help others.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm a firm believer in education. Our foundation in India does it from grade 2 onwards. Like we've started training students from when they're 6, 7, 8, and it makes a difference even at that age. They get it, and I find it really amazing how people think that there's no point to training somebody so young, but they actually bring their parents over, and that's impact.
Absolutely.
Bringing your thank you so much for being here. I want to move on to a new voice, Johnny Benjamin, who was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder 14 years ago. He survived a suicide attempt and has gone on to become an award-winning mental health advocate, film producer, author, and vlogger. Take a look.
I first started hearing a voice in my head when I was about 10 years old. As the years went on, the voice that was once alright started to torment me, and there was nothing to turn it off. Stupidly, I think I'm just gonna wake up one day and everything's gonna be fine, and then and then it comes, and then I start struggling, and it's just a horrible existence to just constantly struggle. Today we launched Think Well, and Think Well is a mental health workshop that we're taking into schools across the country. God, the amount of young people that said to me they were scared talking to people about their thoughts and feelings. We just need to start talking about mental health in schools. Now. Can't wait for it. Now. 8 years ago today, I went to a bridge to jump off, to take my life. I believe I never would have got to that stage in the first place if I'd have just had mental health education at school. I've tried to be honest and real and help people. Thank you for listening.
Johnny joins us from his home in London. Johnny, I have to say that I've been following you, and you are the most unadulterated voice I've ever heard in this space. And I really want to thank you for that, because nobody shares it the way you do. And you've given your followers a 360-degree look at your life, sharing the ups and the downs, the breakdowns, the stigma. What made you start this?
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me as part of this conversation. I've learned so much tonight. I've so much insight and wisdom. So yeah, it's a real privilege to be part of this. What made me start my whole journey was my own lived experience, and realizing that I definitely wasn't alone, and that there's millions of people out there going through this in silence, as we've heard. We've heard firsthand how people have to suffer in silence and not get the help and support that they need, and it's heartbreaking. The stories that I have my own foundation in the UK, and every single day the stories that we hear from young people, from families, heartbreaking, and it doesn't have to be this way. As again we've discussed tonight, it doesn't have to be this way, but it is that way right now. And there's just so much that we can and need to do, and I feel like we've started, but we've got such a long way to go, and so much work to do. But we'll get there. But yeah, a lot to do.
Definitely, we all hope to be able to get to a place where this becomes a way that anybody can reach out for help. And I think that from your journey, the pandemic also took a toll on all of us, and also on you, and you shared that. I would love to know what happened.
Yeah. Well, actually, this time a year ago, I'd just come out of a psychiatric hospital. I had a relapse in my mental health. I've had a few relapses in the last few years. It's part of my mental illness, I guess. But last year was really hard. For everyone, of course. It's been such a hard year and almost 2 years now. It's been so hard. But yeah, for me, I had a really difficult relapse. And being in hospital with all the restrictions, psychiatric hospital is so hard as it is, but then having all the restrictions on top was just it was so tough. And my sort of like recovery took a long time, because I think, as we heard before, that I wasn't connecting with anyone. I was so isolated, and I remember it was winter, like in the UK. Well, yeah, winter lockdown, and it was just it was so hard. It was so hard, but I got through it. I actually I gave myself time. I've never done that before. I gave myself I switched off all my emails, and I took myself away from everything, and I actually took time to recover, which was quite new to me actually. Normally I just when I come out of hospital, I just throw myself back into everything, and I just almost pretend didn't happen, and I just try and but then I have another relapse, but this time I've tried to take care of myself. I've tried.
I'm so glad, because that's you giving empathy to yourself. And I know Raghu's dying to chime in. Raghu, I would love you to first address mental health clinics, wards, and really talk about how we can make that a better experience for people from your point of view. And then let's work towards talking about the kind of space that you need to hold yourself after an episode.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And Johnny, thank you for the work that you do and sharing your story with such vulnerability. It's so important. No one wants to necessarily be in a psychiatric hospital. I'm sure that Johnny can attest to this. It's sort of, you're deprived of a lot of things. And part of that is safety concern and regulations around that. And you can't have much. But it's almost like a place where you're fully exposed to who you are and you can't hide anything anymore. There's a sort of idea that, if you go there, that you don't want to go back, and maybe that will influence your decisions moving forward or your behavior moving forward. I don't necessarily adhere to that idea, but I think that the one thing we can do to make it better is to start to recognize that people going to psychiatric or mental health facilities are human. They're just like you and I, and their voices, like Johnny and myself, who's dealt with, my own moments of depression and anxiety for years. And once we start to truly recognize that from a genuine place of empathy, we can understand, that they deserve to have better facilities, and we can incorporate things that are not just safety concern regulations and psychiatric group therapies or medication, but start to incorporate things like meditation and just a little bit nicer of an environment overall, right? And investing in that. And that takes governments, unfortunately, to back it and to fund it, because oftentimes when it comes to healthcare, mental health is at the bottom of the totem pole for investment. And that's why these facilities seem so archaic and barbaric in many ways. That's one of the biggest things I would say needs to change.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know, Johnny, that you at 5 went to see a psychologist. Your parents took you there. What made them aware to do this?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like my sort of behavior really changed kind of like around the age of 3, 4. I remember bits of it, but I became isolated, and I became quite violent, and I stopped sleeping properly. I was having these what we call night terrors, these really vivid horrible dreams, and I wouldn't sleep, and and my parents obviously didn't know what was going on, and so they took me to this psychologist, but there was such a stigma. So I come from a Jewish family, a Jewish community, and I went to a Jewish school, and we didn't talk, even though we knew that there was something there. We didn't talk about it. We never spoke about it. My family, extended family, and it was just it was a taboo. It was a taboo, and that's difficult to grow up in that sort of way.
Yeah, that's tough. And I know that your diagnosis says that you had schizoaffective disorder. When that label was put on, how did you take it? How did your community take it?
I mean, I was just, I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. And, you know, so I got that diagnosis at the age of 20. I was put into this hospital, and I was also struggling with my sexuality, which, you know, again, coming from a Jewish home, that there was just, it was all too much. It was all too much. And that's why I decided to well, run away from the hospital and to go to this bridge. And, you know, that was it. There was no other alternative. I couldn't live with this diagnosis, and I couldn't live with my sexuality. And it was hell. It was hell. So I know that sounds really, but it really was. It really was. And the only way out of that hell was, you know, to end my life. There was no other way. So it was tough. It was tough. It was really tough. And it took me years. It took me years to deal with it properly. I was 20, and, you know, all my other, like, peers around me were graduating from, like, college and university, getting jobs and having relationships. And I just felt I wasn't human anymore. I didn't feel human anymore.
And there's obviously a continuation of your mental health journey and the support of mental health professionals around you. I'd love to talk a little bit about what are some of your mental health hygiene checks that you do along the way at this point.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I've learned, I'm really lucky. I've learned so much in the last 14 years to help me, and different tools. And, you know, for me, I take medication, and, you know, I have therapy. I have something called CFT, compassion focus therapy, which really has really helped me. I use mindfulness as well, and I have a little thing that I like to use to demonstrate mindfulness. I take this into schools because it really helps to, you know, visualize what mindfulness does. You know, for me, my mind can get so full and overwhelming and, you know, cluttered like the glitter in this jar. But, you know, what mindfulness does for me, whether that's, you know, meditation or running or art or whatever it is, it, you know, it just reduces the intensity of my thoughts and my feelings. And I get some, you know, to finally be able to get some, like, peace of mind. It makes such a difference, even if there's, you know, like, there's so much going on sometimes. But to know that I can find some peace of mind through the meditation, the breathing, honestly, that makes all the difference. But I think it's talking is the key for me, and asking for help. It's still, I find it hard still, if I'm honest. But yeah, I know I have to do it. Yeah.
Talking about the talking, you spend so much time with the youth and with children, and your mission is so powerful to get them to communicate. And I think I heard on one of your talks that where you said that if somebody had spoken to me about mental health when I was young, I would have been much better off. So I'd really like to know what you're doing with the youth right now. How are you teaching them to be able to communicate about mental health?
Yeah, well, you know, when I was at school, the one thing that we got about mental health, they showed us the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, honestly, when we were like 16, and that film put me off talking. I didn't want to end up I knew that I related to the characters. I didn't want to end up in a institution. So I just know that if someone would have come in and talked to me about their feelings and thoughts, it just would have made a difference. And now, you know, we go into schools. I have a foundation. We have an amazing youth board, all young people with lived experience from like 10, you know, in their teens and 20s and 30s. And honestly, they are so inspiring. And, you know, we work with them and go into schools, and we have a mental health festival every year for schools and colleges all around the world. And we also provide funding. We've talked about funding. It's such a big problem in the UK. I mean, there's such long waiting lists for mental health support for young people. So we provide funding for schools and colleges so we can get counselors in, or art therapists, or drama therapists, whatever the school needs, we're able to provide it. And it's great, but there's such a need. There is such a need, especially like, coming out of the pandemic. We're not out of it yet, but it's been such a difficult time for young people, for teachers, for families, and we are seeing such a need, and it really concerns me, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you. Joseph from the chat has mentioned he really appreciates and he's honored by your openness, and you make it much easier for other people to come out and talk about what they're going through. Raghu, I wanted to just respond to what Johnny has said so far and just give your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think that we all share this similar vision that education is so key. And Johnny, the work, I love that little example with the glitter and the sparkles. I love it. I'm going to start to use that if you don't mind too.
Yeah.
I think that it's, again, you bring up that point about the media, right? Watching that film. I mean, that stigmatized mental health for so many people and so many generations. And it's a reason that people don't seek treatment either, because there's a fear. And I think, again, it comes back down to education. So that's really all I want to emphasize again, that we're all kind of, I believe we're all sharing this similar vision and stating that education is key and that it needs to be done starting at an early age.
Can I just add to that?
Highlight.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry. Just something that I think is really key as well is, it can't just be a tick box. Like we see in schools, in workplaces, oh, we'll do one session for World Mental Health Day. We'll do one session and then that's it. And I say to schools, like, you can't just do like one thing and then expect that everyone now knows about mental health. It's got to be a continuous thing. And I'm not going to get too political, but in the UK, the government have this like academic catch-up plan because young people have missed so much school, and young people now need to kind of catch up and be at the same level. And mental health is being lost as a priority because there's so much focus on grades but if we really want to make a difference, it can't just be this whole we're going to do just this one thing, and then it needs to be a continuous thing. And we're finding it so hard for schools to be able to do a continuous thing because there's so much pressure from the government to do academic stuff. So that's a big problem.
And it becomes challenging also when we want to train teachers, because teachers are bombarded with so many responsibilities. So government needs to invest. They need to invest in, whether it's a mental health ambassador in every school or classroom, it's that, or to actually support teachers a little bit more and value them.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point, Raghu. I mean, in India, in the foundations that, in the schools that our foundation works at, there was a case where we were teaching the school and we said, of course, we have to teach the teachers because they're all gatekeepers of the youth. And then we have to train some of the social workers. And the teacher said, we have 80 children in one class. We don't have the time to take care of the one child that needs help. Don't bother talking to us about this. Why don't you just train the social health worker and leave us out of it? And I was like, it doesn't work like that. You will identify the red flags and then pass it over. So we definitely need you to be involved. And I think that, we're also talking about societies here that have a little more means than India. So, in India, the stigma is even higher. I remember when I was growing up, the only thing I heard about mental health, and that also not in a positive way, because it was never spoken about positively. In fact, they still don't talk about mental health that much, was if you talk to yourself, and it was in the native language that this was said, that if you talk to yourself, you're mad. That's it. That was the one statement. And literally, like anybody who spoke to themselves, which is actually quite normal to do, we actually felt like, oh my God, 1 second, we better not be doing this because people are going to watch us. That was it. Stress was not a word I'd heard till I got out of India and I was in Toronto and I was studying there. I didn't even know what stress was. No idea. I think of that as a positive as well, but imagine the people that were going through stress, right? That actually had no place to communicate it because there was no word in the language for this phenomenon. So I think it's really important. And I think that after you, Johnny, launched your Think Well, you were identified by the Queen of England for making an impact. I think your voice is so important that, when you say these things, hopefully, there might be a change. So what is, how did you become an MBE, or a member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, in 2017?
Yeah, that was, I think it was maybe a mistake. No, I don't know. It was, it was quite a little bit embarrassing because, I don't know. No, none of us do this work for, recognition. We do it because we're so passionate about it. So, I mean, it was so lovely and very special for my family. And actually, I was in hospital just before I got you get a medal, and at Buckingham Palace. And I didn't think I was going to make it. I was really unwell, but thankfully I pulled through, and I made it to the palace, and it was actually quite emotional because it's a whole big ceremony, and Prince William is there to give you your medal. And to be honest, what I found kind of most the best thing about it was hearing Prince William and actually all the young royals and Prince Harry and Meghan all sharing their passion for mental health. They're so passionate about mental health, and to have, we talked about role models, to have these role models like, Meghan, Harry, Prince William and Catherine all talking about mental health and encouraging other people to talk about mental health. That's huge. They've got such a platform. So I think it's really sort of exciting time. We've got a lot to do, but exciting that so many people now are, sharing this passion to make a difference.
Thank you. And I think your commitment to helping young people is rather extraordinary. And I think we do have a video of some young people talking about your work. So let's have a look at that.
I was diagnosed with OCD at the age of 12. I've always struggled with anxiety, I think, up until that point, and I didn't realise it until I hit breaking point.
I started getting bullied, and it carried on for months and years, and I had a funny voice in my head and would tell me to hurt myself and others.
I had my first psychotic episode when I was around 14 and 15, which led to me being sectioned in hospital for the first time.
When I was 16 years old, I was put on section in hospital for about 2 years, having suffered suicidal attempts.
I honestly think that if people actually offered me that support and if services were actually accessible, I wouldn't have made that attempt on my life, and I would be in a better place right now.
Johnny, for Mental Health Day, what is your big message, and what would you like to see in the next 3 years?
Gosh, that's so much change. So much change is needed. For me, the key is investment and funding, but also, time given to it. Not just, I feel mental health is, we're doing it at such a surface level, dealing with it at just the very surface. Like, no one wants to go deep. Everyone, on World Mental Health Day, you're gonna hear everyone say talk, but that's all they say. No one wants to go deep, and no one wants to listen. That is what we are finding with the young people that we work with. No one wants to really sit and truly listen. And people need to be listened to when they are struggling with their mental health, not just given a medication or pass from person to person to person. They need someone dedicated there to and I feel in the world that we're living in with these we're losing that real proper dedicated time with other people and that connection. And it just there's so much we need to do. But I think if you just do one thing, I think really listen to what everyone is saying to you. And also listen out for what's not being said as well.
Yeah, that's so important. But thank you, Johnny, for joining us today. It's been wonderful to have you here. Thank you. I'd like to bring back Andrea Sonnenberg to discuss her new podcast, which premieres this Sunday, October 10th, World Mental Health Day. Let's have a listen.
I want to focus on success stories. So I began having open conversations with young adults who are getting through despite their mental health struggles.
Depression was a very stigmatized word.
The struggle was to not lose myself, which I did.
It felt like there was a label put on me and there was something wrong with me.
For a long time, I don't even think I knew how to be authentically me.
Asking them how they manage.
I had asked my mom if I could go to therapy.
Cultivating my conscious connection with God or with a higher power.
What gives them hope?
We have the ability to really destigmatize it, normalize it individually, one-on-one with people in our lives.
I've always had this feeling like all this crazy stuff that I was going through was only going to help me connect to more people.
My commitment to helping people overall, my heart is like set on that.
Things do get better. They really do.
I love the concept, Andrea. It's amazing. And I know that one of your guests are with us, Kevin Nahai, who, after being diagnosed with an incurable disease at the age of 19, Kevin took his mental health. With his mental health, he tried to take his life. He struggled with panic attacks, depression, suicidal ideation, severe anorexia. And Kevin joins us today from Los Angeles. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, Prakriti. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Andrea, for bringing me on the podcast. Everyone should listen as soon as it premieres. It's really incredible series.
I'm excited.
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward. So, Kevin, do you think your mental health struggles were cause of your diagnosis?
Do I think they were the cause of my diagnosis, or do I think they were caused by my diagnosis?
By your diagnosis.
Well, it depends which one we're talking about. So, for example, I was a very, very anxious kid, and I worried a lot. And actually, my mom put me in therapy when I was 9, when I was in the 3rd grade, because I was dealing with migraines and throwing up, stomach problems due to anxiety. And then when I was 19 and I started getting panic attacks, that anxiety reared its ugly head. In a similar vein, I was bullied when I was in elementary school for being chubby, and I never spoke about it to anybody. I just sort of stuffed it down. And then I ended up with a severe eating disorder. So what I believe is that mental health issues, sometimes we're born with them, sometimes they're biological or chemical, and sometimes they don't show themselves until later in life. Usually when they show themselves later in life, they are precipitated or catalyzed by some sort of a traumatic event, but the underpinning was there, and usually has some relation to something that happened in your childhood. So in my case, my mental health took a severe nosedive when I was diagnosed with this disease, and I was very traumatized, and I started losing weight rapidly, and I was in excruciating pain. I lost complete control of my life. And as a result of that, all of these other mental health issues were exacerbated. But I think that the foundation was there from issues that had happened previously, even though I wasn't cognizant of them until this traumatic event actually brought them to the forefront, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I want to just go to Raghu for a moment, just to lay down the foundation. Raghu, what Kevin has just mentioned is that there are different types of mental health illnesses and where they stem from, whether it's neurological, biological, environmental, addictions, etc. I'd really like you to just highlight a bit about it and then respond to Kevin.
Sure. Thanks for sharing your story, Kevin. And I'm looking forward to the podcast as well and to tuning in this Sunday. You bring up such an important point, right? Is that mental health is something that's affected by so many different things. It's not just genetic. It's not just, like, oh, this one person has depression. Why? There's epigenetics, there's environment. It's such a multifaceted thing. And the fact of the matter is that every single human has mental health, and we're on a spectrum. And one day we might be on one side of the spectrum, the other day we might be on the other side of the spectrum, and we fluctuate. And it's factors like you mentioned, whether it's traumas or just experiences of life that happen, the environments that we're in that affect this. And so you can have a wide variety, and they also present differently for different people. You mentioned that as a kid you were having sort of these stomach issues and so forth, and a lot of children tend to present with these, quote, somatic symptoms of anxiety, and that might be different when they're older and they start to have more ruminative thoughts going on in their head, and it's more internalized, versus kind of outwardly externalized. So it's such a wide range. And what I would encourage folks to understand is that it's a spectrum, and to respect and to appreciate that there's a spectrum. And it's not just stress, depression, anxiety. There is the schizoaffective, the bipolar, the addiction. It's such a wide range. And part of being human is having mental health. It's about taking care of it with hygiene.
Absolutely. And it's also, it's not binary. So when I mentioned that I was a very anxious kid, I was also a complete goofball. I was hilarious. I was very high energy, very extroverted. And before my life fell apart in my freshman year of college, just 3 months before that, I was a cool kid in high school. I was a senior. I had great friends, and I had a pretty happy life. So sometimes just because you don't see that a person is at risk of having a mental health disorder doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, or that, like you said, one day you can be feeling good and feeling able to conquer the world, and 3 days later or 2 months later, everything can shift on a dime. And it's very important, just like Andrea said earlier, her son Bradley was extremely sensitive and had difficulty with emotional and behavioral regulation, but at the same time, he was beautiful and deep and artistic and creative. So, in the case of Bradley, it sounds like her son's, Bradley's symptoms were more easily recognizable and diagnosable, but everybody, it's not like you're crazy or you're not. Everybody has a range of mental health issues, and just because you can't see them immediately doesn't mean that they're not manifesting in other ways.
Right. Yeah, and you're not the disorder, right? It's just something you have. It's a part of you as a person. You're not a schizophrenic. You are someone who has schizophrenia, but you are an artist, you are a musician, you are an actor, you are a doctor, whatever it is. And it's just a part of you.
That is so important to emphasize, that it's not who you are and it does not define you. And we have to remember that. And looking at Kevin and at Johnny and the amazing work that they're doing and the amazing things that they've accomplished and all their talents, is a perfect representation of that story. That you're it's just a part of you.
Yeah, and I know that Andrea, you'd mentioned in one of your talks that people would walk around with the X-rays of their children who'd broken their legs, but they won't talk about this because they know that a broken leg doesn't make the child a broken person. And the same kind of unfortunate labeling, it doesn't hold value here. I mean, it's totally disrupted when it comes to mental health. So I think that's a really important point. The labeling has to go, because mental health is something you face, but it doesn't make you who you are. That's such an important statement today. I know that, Kevin, there are some things that we need to start talking about, and that's what we're trying to do here, is make sure that people open up and understand that we need to communicate. What are some things that we don't talk enough about regarding our mental health?
It's a great question, and I could probably write a novel about that, just like everybody else on this incredible panel. Excuse me. So one is more conceptual, and the other is more practical. The more conceptual answer, my answer to that question, is that you always hear about airplanes that crash and burn, but you rarely hear about airplanes that have a broken wing or a gas leak or something is just not quite functioning. And the analogy is that we talk about these extraordinary cases of people being suicidal, losing their lives, being schizophrenic from the age of 11 years old. And these cases, we do need to hear extraordinary cases to sort of wake us up and call our attention. But you know, in my talks and with my clients, a lot of people have the idea that they'll look at me and they'll say, "Oh my God, you know, you were 112 pounds, you were skin and bone, you couldn't get out of bed for 24 hours, you were so depressed. That sounds awful. I can't imagine that." But what they don't understand is you don't have to be an extreme in order to have a mental health issue. Anxiety is a mental health issue. Stress, the accumulation of years of being sad, lifestyle habits that are negatively affecting your mental health, relationships that are negatively affecting the way that you feel. These things are valid and they're important and they need to be given attention, because if they're untreated, then they fester and eventually they get worse and worse and worse. An infection that results in somebody having their arm cut off started as an infection, and if it had been treated then and taken seriously then you wouldn't hear about that person's arm getting cut off. But you hear about their arm getting cut off, and then they tell the story, and it's like, you don't really care that it started 10 years ago. What you care about is the fact that, oh my God, now they had their arm amputated and now we're going to pay attention. So I think most people on this panel would agree that if we can pay attention earlier when the signs and symptoms are not as severe, it will all benefit in the long run. So that's my sort of overarching answer to what we don't talk about enough. A more practical answer that we don't talk about enough, especially in my age cohort, I'm 29, so people in their 20s and 30s, is the effect of two things. One of them is relationships, and two is alcohol and diet and recreational drugs. In my generation, it is acceptable and normal to have very dysfunctional, toxic relationships, romantically and sexually, and to consume inordinate amounts of alcohol and drugs, you know, cocaine, weed, whatever, because that's just what young people do. But then we are flabbergasted when we're so depressed and anxious and we have stress and our physical health is starting to be affected. And and it's the same thing with our relationships. The quality of your life is the quality of your relationships. And we're taught in school the Pythagorean theorem and history, but we're not taught how to take care of our health, how to have healthy, stable, lasting relationships. And nowhere is the problem, you know, the fallout of those two things more prevalent than people in their 20s and 30s, young professionals specifically, who they don't realize how their negative lifestyle habits are really severely affecting their mental and emotional health.
Yeah, that is so true. And I remember my husband telling me once that he was 17 on his 17th birthday. They went out drinking and then he was in a hospital trying to get his stomach pumped. So I was like, why would you do that to yourself? But it's true. I mean, there is a peer pressure push that comes with it, I suppose, with the times of getting to an adult. And unfortunately, you're right, people don't take that seriously enough. I do think that we're coming to the end of today, and I would really like for everybody here to offer some key takeaways, which will help us wrap up our session. So let me start with Raghu.
Yeah. we spoke about so much today, and I think that I want to echo something that Johnny said. I had mentioned earlier the importance of reaching out to someone genuinely every day, at least once, and having that conversation. But, Johnny, you got me thinking. I think it's more about when I say have the conversation, it's also about being present to listen, like you mentioned, and being present to listen on a regular basis, like Kevin's mentioning, not just when there's a crisis, but to be proactive and not just reactive. So that's the one thing. And that's going to fulfill you as well personally by reaching out to somebody and actually being there for them.
Thank you. Andrea.
I think sort of tying into the listening and the being there for someone, I would say the goal behind our podcast is to show stories of resilience and to show people what can be accomplished so that we can give people hope. And, back to what Raghu was saying, hope is so important. And I used to say when my son was struggling and really, really struggling, and I would say to myself, as long as he's alive, there's hope. And so we have to hang on to that. And so that's why I wanted to focus on stories of resilience, stories of success, stories of overcoming obstacles and learning to manage mental health struggles, because they don't just go away, they're there, but learning how to manage them, to give inspiration and hope to other people, to look and say, wow, if that person hit rock bottom and was able to succeed, I can do it. I can do it too. And so that we can be there for each other, to support each other.
Thank you so much. I have a few tips that I'd like to mention. When we discuss, how to know when you need a mental health break, the idea is, start with learning to differentiate between good and bad stress, identify red flags, educate yourself on mental health, normalize taking care of your mental health. Nowadays, a lot of people feel guilty about taking time for their mental health, and I think that needs to change. Give yourself permission to rest. And I want to say this more and more, because now that we're becoming a culture that is on Zoom, we need to focus on giving ourselves time to rest. And what should I do on World Mental Health Day? This is important, because if you're asking yourself that question, we have some bullet points for you. Volunteer. Educate yourself and others. Practice self-care. Support loved ones. Talk to a counselor. I think the last point is really important, because even if every 6 months you go for a health check. I mean, why don't you go for a mental health check? Even if you don't have anything, go and talk with a counselor every 6 months. I think that should be part of every healthcare plan. So this was a really important conversation. I want to thank you all for being here. It's been brilliant to have such amazing people, and with the work that you're doing, helping and supporting other people. Being a coach, being somebody who's advocating this, giving scholarships for people who need help, and Raghu, tirelessly, I know how tirelessly you work on this. It's just amazing. And then having Johnny with us, who's such an unadulterated voice, and I'm falling in love with how he's able to lead people through his own life as an example, and Tim Lewis, who's doing so much work with the foundation. This has been such a great conversation, and I really feel blessed that we can kick off World Mental Health Day with this, and thank you so much for being here once again.